Well, thank you very much, Marty. Good afternoon, everybody. It's great to be with you today. I'll try not to hold you up from tea too long. So my topic is Keys to the Future, Cyber Resilience in the Era of Quantum Computers. Now, I'm guessing this is a topic that is already fairly well known, perhaps very well known to many of you in the audience. But it's a subject that, until very recently, was actually kind of really only of interest to sort of uber nerds like myself. You might read about it in a cybersecurity blog or perhaps in a physics journal. But outside that, people really didn't know anything about it. But an interesting thing has happened in the last few months. And this topic seems to really have captured the public imagination. And you'll now commonly find it on the sort of front pages of the mass media. So, for example, here are some headlines that I captured just Friday when I was putting this presentation together. Now, I don't want to scare anybody, but you did all know the quantum apocalypse is coming, didn't you? I mean, there's some incredible headlines here. The quantum apocalypse, it's going to be a threat to our way of life. And my favorite is this one here. Quantum computing could be worse than the apocalypse. I mean, is there anything actually worse than the apocalypse? I thought the apocalypse was as bad as it gets. You know, I can just imagine coming home one day. How was your day, darling? Well, it wasn't great. The apocalypse started. But just be grateful. At least no one built a quantum computer. It's just crazy. So this is obviously really scary. And, you know, I think it's something we all need to be worried about. And my question was, who's responsible? Someone's responsible for all of this. So I decided to go to the ultimate source of truth, of course, Google, and I asked it, please tell me, if we look worldwide in the last 5 years, who is responsible for all this activity in quantum computing that threatens us with the quantum apocalypse? And here's what Google told me. Now, I have to admit, I was a little bit surprised by that. Now, the only thing I can think, St. Helena, number 3, the biggest threat, one of the leading contributors to the global quantum apocalypse. As far as I'm aware, St. Helena is a little island in the middle of the Atlantic. So I'm assuming it's the home of Spectre. And probably somewhere beneath an extinct volcano, they're building a giant quantum computer that is going to be the root cause of the quantum apocalypse. Where's James Bond when you need him? And don't answer that if you've seen the last movie, by the way. But seriously, though, there are some very important questions that I think we all need to understand in this topic. And I want to spend the remainder of this session really kind of trying to meaningfully ask, how can we assess, in a real sense, the threat that is posed to our current cybersecurity, and how soon do we actually need to worry about it, and what, if anything, should we be doing? So let's start with a kind of level set and ask, what is quantum computing? So anybody know who this guy is? Thank you very much. Scott Aaronson. He's a fantastic professor of computer science at the University of Texas. And he has, I think, what is my favorite definition of quantum computing, which is the study of what we can't do with computers we don't have, which on one level is completely comical, but is also actually extremely accurate. And I just love the way he described it. He's got a fantastic TED talk there on that link if you haven't heard him speak. He's very entertaining. But this is a one-sentence definition of quantum computing that I quite like. Quantum computing is a proposed new type of computer that seeks to exploit the properties of quantum mechanics, such as entanglement and superposition, to exponentially speed up computing performance for some hard problems. Now, I think there's just 3 things that you need to take away from this that hopefully will give you a kind of intuition, if you don't already have it, about how a quantum computer works and what it is. Firstly, it's a proposed type of computer. In other words, they don't exist yet. Yes, there are small-scale quantum computers. You've probably all read about IBM and Google and quantum supremacy. But without criticizing the work of those guys, which is amazing, they are still toy computers, toy quantum computers, and we can't really do anything useful with them. And up until about 20 years ago, many computer scientists and physicists believed that we would never actually be able to build a large-scale quantum computer. And that view, I think, has changed now, but it's still a significant engineering challenge. Second point is that this is a computer that is a difference in kind, not a difference in degree. it is fundamentally harnessing nature in a completely different way. So it is not a faster version of the computers that we use today. It's not got more memory, more cores, the next generation of Intel. It's a fundamentally different way of harnessing nature to compute. And the third one is that it's going to be extremely useful for some hard problems, but not for all problems. Essentially, a quantum computer will be a giant optimization machine that will be extremely useful for some tasks. But you're probably not going to have one in your pocket. You may not have one at home. You're probably going to access them over the cloud through one of the big cloud providers, and they will complement, not replace, today's conventional computers. So they can be very hard to understand. I'm certainly not a quantum physicist. I've got a layman's understanding of it. And I think one of the things about quantum technology is, even if you've got a strong STEM background or you've worked as a professional in engineering or in cyber, you don't have an intuition that can really help you in this area. I think with AI and with cloud, they're kind of amazing, innovative technologies. I think we all kind of get how they work. We know how the cloud works. It's somebody else's computer, lots of them. We kind of get a sense for how AI works and deep learning. But with quantum technology, it's so counterintuitive that there's almost this kind of leap of faith to actually understand how it works. That's my opinion anyway. But don't worry, all is not lost. I have found a guide to help you on this journey. It's called the Quantum Bullshit Detector. And I commend it to you. It's actually a Twitter site that provides quantum bullshit detection as a service. So whenever an academic paper or some company makes some amazing pronouncement about we're going to have a 1 million qubit quantum computer by 2025 and you should invest all your money with us, you can actually go to this site, and this is what they'll do for you. They'll read the paper or the article. If it's bullshit, they'll label it bullshit. If it's not bullshit, they'll label it not bullshit. How elegant and simple is that? I love it. Now, I don't actually know who's behind this. It's a bit like Bitcoin. It's a mystery. But I've been through it and I follow it, and it generally has some really interesting. So it's a serious site. I do recommend you go and look at it. So let's ask that first question. What is the significance of quantum computing on cybersecurity? And the answer is that the biggest impact is going to be on cryptography or encryption. Now, there are two principal types of cryptography that are commonly used, as I'm sure you know. Symmetric key encryption, that's used to encrypt data at high performance levels, at high speed. It's what we use to encrypt network packets across the internet, for example, with algorithms such as AES. And then we have asymmetric, also known as public key cryptography, which is part of PKI, public key infrastructure. And we use that to do things like digital signatures, to sign applications, to verify and authenticate people who send us information, and also to exchange keys across networks. Now, unfortunately, two of the best uses that we currently know of today for a quantum computer are two very well-known algorithms called Grover's algorithm and Shor's algorithm. And they both have an impact on cryptography as we use it today. So specifically, symmetric cryptography with Grover's algorithm, which is essentially a very forced brute search, it has the impact of halving the effective key size of symmetric encryption that we use today. So an AES algorithm using 256 bits of key material would be reduced to 128 bits of effective strength. That's not great, but we can do something about it by increasing the key size. Unfortunately, Shor's algorithm has a worse impact. Essentially, it breaks all of the public key or asymmetric cryptography that we use today, essentially kind of overnight, because those algorithms are based on an assumption of mathematical hardness that no longer holds if we can scale up a quantum computer to implement Shor's algorithm. So that's more problematic, and that's what we really have to worry about. What do we do about it? Don't panic. First thing, stay calm. The quantum apocalypse is still a fair way off. Okay, so where are we in this journey? Well, we're currently in an era called the NISQ, Noisy Intermediate Scale Quantum Era. This was a term coined by John Preskill from Caltech, now works at Amazon as well, in which we do not have error-corrected quantum computers. We have very small-scale quantum computers that are limited in size to maybe 50 or 100 qubits, that essentially we don't have practical error-corrected quantum techniques that would allow us to scale up into much larger sizes. it's estimated that we would need approximately 1 million error-corrected qubits or quantum bits to break something like RSA with a 2048-bit key. Those numbers vary. Others of you may have different opinions on that, but those are some numbers I got from some recent papers. So we're here. We've got a long way to go to get there. Is this going to be 20 years, 5 years, 6 months? Never. I don't know the answer to that. I'm sure many of you will have opinions. All I can tell you is there's an awful lot of money going into this area, and there are breakthroughs every single month at the moment. So what do we do about this? Well, basically, we have to build a new generation of public key cryptography. We don't have to worry so much about the symmetric stuff because we can have bigger keys, but we need to build a new generation of PKI, and we're going to do that using different type of mathematics. So you'll see some new algorithms come out. There's sometimes the terminology here is very confusing. Sometimes these are called post-quantum cryptography, or PQC. Sometimes they're called quantum-resistant algorithms, or QRA. But what you need to know is that there is currently a lot of work happening in the industry. It's being led by NIST in the US, National Institute of Standards and Technologies. We heard about them earlier. They have been working for years, essentially through a competitive process to develop the next generation of algorithms. There are other techniques as well, something called quantum key distribution, which is a way of distributing symmetric keys using quantum mechanics. That's confusingly called quantum cryptography. It's a little bit different. And then we can actually use quantum information science, the inherent randomness in quantum mechanics, to generate very strong random numbers and keys for all sorts of purposes. So question 2, what is the impact going to be on our current levels of security, and within what time frame? Well, what we need to do is we need to achieve quantum resilience, which is the ability of a system to remain secure against a quantum computing attack. And to do that, we need to basically have a systematic migration from quantum vulnerable algorithms, which is where we are today, to quantum safe algorithms or quantum resistant algorithms with these new technologies. So that's kind of well understood. But I think the important question is, do we need to rush to do this? Is there any urgency? So what I want to do is give you 3 reasons why I think we do need to consider this with some urgency and probably actually get a move on rather than hanging around waiting for somebody to announce they build a quantum computer. The first reason is your data already has an expiry date. Everything that we encrypt today in our digital ecosystem is quantum vulnerable. It has no protection against large-scale quantum computing. And every piece of information that we encrypt has some sort of timeline, a shelf life, a digital shelf life, how long it must remain secret. And I like this quote I read the other day. Unlike a fine wine, encryption does not improve with age. So one way to think about the data that we're sending out into the world today encrypted is it's kind of rotting. It's actually already starting to decay. And we have this risk that in the future, somebody might have a breakthrough in quantum computing. They might be able to capture the information that we're sending out today. And if it is still important and we know we don't wish it to be disclosed, they can decrypt it with these new techniques, and we will have a very severe loss of information. And we know from revelations from people like Edward Snowden of what we call the harvest now and decrypt later attack, which is where nation states are basically siphoning up into encrypted server farms protected data with a belief that at some point there'll be a breakthrough and they can actually decrypt it. So, I mean, all of us has sensitive data, and of course, some information is more sensitive than others. So I might give you temporary credentials to my email service or to download a file that's only important for a few hours. In a corporate setting, data is going to be important for weeks or months. In the military space, obviously, we have classified information. And of course, there's some information that is personal to us, my DNA, my genetic sequence, that has a lifetime of my life, however long I live for. So you can see here, you really have to start thinking about what are the data confidentiality requirements for all of the information that we're trying to protect using cryptography. Reason 2 is the simple scale of the problem. I like to think of encryption as digital cement, because every aspect of our digital economy, our digital ecosystem, is founded on some form of cryptography. Every website that we go to, we encrypt it using a TLS connection. Every application we download from the App Store is signed by a digital signature. Every time we do a banking transaction, it really is the foundation of everything we do. And unfortunately, because of the risk of quantum computing, cracks are appearing in this foundation. And even the most small to medium organization has many, many devices that are impacted by this. Every mobile device, every laptop, every printer, every computer server uses some form of cryptography. And many of those devices are not what we call crypto-agile, which is they can be easily upgraded to these new algorithms when they become available. They're going to take time to replace them. It's going to be a long, drawn-out process. So we have a scale problem. It's huge. It affects everything in our digital life. And the third reason is actually making this transition from quantum vulnerable to quantum safe is going to be much harder than we think. I mean, I could ask any of you, do you know all the places where cryptography is used in your house? Think of all the devices that you have in your house. Phones, home pods, watches, PlayStations. Do you think all of them use cryptography? I would bet almost every single one of those is using cryptography. We don't know, though, and in an organizational setting, we're not actually sure. We don't have a map, a clear map, a sort of magic dashboard that tells us where all of these algorithms are being used, where the keys are being hidden, and what job we have to do to migrate to these new standards. So it impacts an absolutely massive technology base, and like that iceberg there, most of the risk is not transparent or visible to us. We do have an issue of actually uncovering this, and if we uncover it, we probably won't like what we see. So here's a plausible scenario. It's very likely that it's going to take a long time to achieve quantum resilience. We know that infrastructures take a very long time to migrate. Think about what versions of operating systems some of you are probably using in your environment. I'm guessing some of you are on fairly old versions. Do you all update your tablets, your phones as regularly as you should do? I probably don't. So we know that massive technical migrations like this take a lot of time. But the good news is we can actually start to think about this now. These standards that are emerging in quantum-resistant cryptography, the first versions of those will be released literally in the coming days or weeks from NIST. They will be draft standards, and within 2 years they will become formal standards released by the US government, and then the rest of the world will start to adopt them. But we can actually already start to deploy some of these algorithms today in a way that we call hybrid encryption. So we double encrypt. We use the safe security that we know and that we trust today, and we still believe in it. And we add an additional layer of security by adding these new quantum-resistant algorithms in such a way that hopefully doesn't slow down our networks, doesn't mean that we can't open applications because they're very slow to open. So we combine quantum-vulnerable PKI with tomorrow's quantum-safe PKI. And you're going to go and start to see in the coming months and years more and more products talk about crypto agility and adding quantum-safe algorithms, possibly in this hybrid way. And if we can do that, there's some good news. We can actually shrink that window of vulnerability in such a way that even data with a long shelf life, assuming it still takes many years before we have a practical large-scale quantum computer, which I think is what most experts would agree with, and come and tell me at tea if you disagree with that. You may have more insights, but most people think it's still going to be many years. Hopefully we can remove or shrink that window of vulnerability and keep our sensitive data safe. That's with one big caveat. That assumes these new algorithms are actually good enough. And that's a big ask, because not only do they need to be safe against quantum computers, they need to be safe against all the attacks that we know about and have designed to protect against for many years. And of course, we don't have quantum computers yet that we can really test against. So there's a lot of uncertainty in this landscape. Good news is we're starting to see some real signs of urgency. So the Department of Homeland Security, end of last year, put out a memo to all agency heads warning against not being prepared for this coming transition. And they laid out a really interesting roadmap to try and mitigate risks. The head of, senior guy at the Pentagon left his job very recently, last month, and he warned again that the Pentagon is not taking this threat seriously and that they need to start putting in place these kind of mitigations. So what's the path to quantum resilience going to look like for most organizations? There's going to be a multi-step process. Firstly, you're going to have to run some sort of inventory to discover where your quantum vulnerable assets are inside your organization. Then you're going to have to form some sort of classification, some prioritization, because you're not going to be able to upgrade everything in one hit. So this is a simple data classification step But not only do you have to classify data against sensitivity, you have to also classify it against shelf life and the data life cycle to understand what the temporal nature of that data sensitivity is, which is kind of something new for us to think about. You have to prioritize it, of course, and then you're going to have to engage with suppliers of new cryptography, new schemes. You're going to have to update software in your products. Many of this will happen automatically. One day your Apple iPhone will upgrade and it'll put in place these new algorithms. But you'll find that you have a lot of systems that are where the hardware, the encryption is implemented in hardware. And unfortunately, they're going to need chip replacements to upgrade some of these algorithms. So it's going to be a combination of simple software upgrades and far more painful refreshments of hardware across the board. So I hope I haven't scared you about the quantum apocalypse. Don't worry. I think it's still a few years off. But seriously, though, for all of us as individuals and as employees, in whatever our roles, I think every organization should have this on their risk register. As a bare minimum, it should be an issue that is on the risk register of every organization and discussed frankly at the board level. Because without a doubt, quantum is coming. These new algorithms will become standardized and we will migrate to them. There are some very bold claims being made about some major breakthroughs anticipated in the next few years about quantum computing, and we may be caught short. So I think if you understand this and remain educated about the progress, look it up, keep informed, and start to think about in your world, in your job, within your responsibilities, what might this impact? What kind of things do you need to think about? And you can do things like a quantum risk assessment. There's some very simple free forms on the internet which just sort of guide you through step by step, starting to think about a sort of quantum risk assessment in your organization. So nothing to panic about, but something interesting, and urge you to go and do your research and give it your best thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julian, for that. Keeping in mind